thank you everybody in person. It's been 2.5 years of not having in-person stuff, so it's kind of fun to have that now. A little clunky with this hybrid in-person and remote, but we'll get through it. We're going to have to pass it kind of back and forth to each other, so it'll take a little bit of time there. But we'll still get you out of here by 7 o'clock. So, well, this computer's muted. This is not. I've got 2 computers, so you can see. The agenda for tonight, as we'll do welcome and some introductions. We're going to talk about the Brownfield program updates, some status overview, a few highlighted projects that are within the city of Colorado Springs and Fountain. We'll talk about our outreach and public engagement, and then open up to a quick question and answer. If you have them, you guys will be able to ask questions because you're on microphones and speakers here, so everybody online can hear you. And then there's a chat button, so if you go to the lower right-hand corner, or if you're online, you can see that question tab for Q&A. Type whatever questions you have in there. We've got people monitoring the chat, so that we'll try to answer those. As of right now, we're going to answer most of the questions at the end of the presentation, but if we see a couple things that pop into the chat that we want to bring up that are relevant, we'll do that. So let's go ahead and keep getting started. So once again, my name is Aaron Egbert. I'm the city's project manager for the EPA Brownfield grant. I am an engineer in public works, city engineering, and the reason that I'm kind of involved with the Brownfield program is through the Envision Schuch Run Facilities Master Plan. I was the project manager of that plan and was the one that helped prepare the grant, write the grant for the Brownfield itself. And then I'll just go down the list here to everybody to introduce themselves, and then we'll do Kerry, who will introduce herself at the last.
Sounds good. Kimberly Bailey, Economic Development, Urban Renewal with the City of Fountain. I oversee both of those areas. Our primary emphasis has been the Urban Renewal US 8587 corridor under this project scope with the consultant and our coalition partners.
I'm Max Nofru. I'm with Communications Office, mostly doing tech support.
Tonight.
Yes.
Tech support tonight. Media releases tomorrow.
Yeah.
Shauna, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Shauna Lippert. I'm the Senior Economic Development Specialist for the city in the Economic Development Division, and I offer support from just a bigger picture economic development perspective. So, welcome everyone.
Want to make Kerry live?
Carrie, you're live.
Hi there. Thanks. I'm Kerry Radke. I'm with Stantec Consulting Services. I'm actually up in Oregon, but I'm a Brownfield Project Manager Specialist, and so I've been helping the city manage their EPA Brownfield grant.
Thanks, Kerry. So kind of a little bit about some of the brownfields too. One of the things that the EPA does is they do a Brownfield Conference. They had one this year in August. It was at Oklahoma City, and it was 107 degrees when I left the airport. It did cool down a little bit, but great resource if someone wants to go to a conference to learn about brownfields, whether you're a consultant or a citizen. They're very helpful. It's a great conference to go to. On this one, I was actually part of a panel, so we discussed public engagement for about an hour. I was on there with Dave Laney and Ryan Gibbons and myself. Each of us talked about our experiences with the Brownfield program, with what public engagement worked and didn't work, some of the unique techniques we used with QR codes on our postcards, just different things we've used during COVID times to still do our public outreach, which really made it real difficult at the start of this project to outreach to the community as much as we had wanted to. And then a little plug for the next Brownfield Conference. Usually they're every 2 years, but because of COVID and missing a couple of years, the next one will be in Detroit next August. So if you have an interest in brownfields, I strongly encourage you to look up and maybe attend the conference in Detroit. And with that, I will turn it live over to Kerry to kind of go through our projects.
Great. Great, thank you, Aaron. Yeah, so a project status overview. On the next slide, here's the project timeline. So we've been working on this project since October 1, 2019. October 1 is when EPA's fiscal year starts. So it's been 3 years, and that is typically the period of time that a grant is issued to a community. But EPA always ends up extending the length of the grants because it's a lot of work to get done in 3 years. So that has happened with this grant. We asked for and received an extension, so we have currently through the end of September next year to get through the remaining funding. So on the next slide, a summary of some of the activities that we've done. So this grant pays for environmental assessments, so that can be a phase 1, which is a desktop study of the history of a property and any past potentially contaminating uses, but it doesn't involve any sampling, it's just a study of the history. So we've done 6 of those. It pays for phase 2 ESAs, environmental site assessments, and that is where you actually go in and take some samples, soil, groundwater, soil gas, whatever is appropriate given the conditions of the site. So we've done 6 of those. You can also use the grant to collect samples of building materials like asbestos and lead paint. So we've done 3 building materials surveys using the funding. And then you can use it to plan for cleanup or reuse, redevelopment options. You can't use the funds to actually conduct the cleanup, but you can plan for cleanup and you can do all kinds of creative things to support the property's reuse. So on the next slide, this just gives kind of a high-level overviews of what we've done, particularly within Colorado Springs. So as Aaron mentioned, Shook's Run was kind of the impetus for this grant to carry on some of the revitalization that's been going on along the Shook's Run corridor. So you can see Shook's Run as it snakes down through that part of Colorado Springs there, and that the stars, those are where we've spent grant money, where we've done phase 1s and phase 2s and reuse planning, or we're doing it currently. So it's nice and tight right around that corridor that is the focus area. And then the idea was, Fountain Creek comes in and joins Shook's Run and flows down to Fountain. So on the next slide, you'll see this is kind of, Fountain is down there in the lower right corner, but the Fountain Creek corridor snakes up to the northwest there. So these are the locations in the Fountain area where we've used grant funds for environmental assessments and reuse planning, and we'll share a little bit more about the specifics of those projects as we move along here. In terms of the budget, so this grant, the original grant amount was $600,000. So we've already spent or earmarked about, these are round numbers, but about $550,000 on the work that I just kind of summarized. So there's only about $50,000 left, so we could probably do another phase 1 or 2, or if it was a very sort of limited scope, phase 2 environmental site assessment. But then, there's a lot of sort of closeout reporting and paperwork that has to be done in terms of project management that we have to reserve a little budget for. So very close to the end of this grant. So we'll go through spotlights of selected projects where we use the grant funding. And I will hand it over, I believe, now. Oh, I have one more slide, yeah. So we'll start with the phase 1 environmental site assessments and desktop studies, and Aaron will kick us off there.
One of the projects we wanted to highlight was the transit mix. That is a concrete batch plant that's just on the east side of Colorado Springs. That area is ripe for redevelopment. Is one of the areas when we did the Envision Shook's Run, or we did the facilities master plan, and also applied for this grant, and we thought we could help repurpose that plant. The Catalyst campus, which is up at Pikes Peak and Shook's Run, has acquired some property. You'll see that as we get further in the slides. But then they've also are trying to, and I think they might have a contract to acquire this transit mix site. And we're currently working with the owner of Transit Mix to get on site to do some testing and see what environmental issues we need to abate as that project redeveloped. But this is a very exciting one right in the downtown core that we're really looking forward to bringing it up to its highest and best use. The old St. Francis Hospital, that was acquired by a developer quite a while ago. They have been working on a few things, some of their planning, but we're really trying to help them with a data gaps analysis, just because the hospital is so old. How can we help them create a mitigation plan to turn it into a mixed use? Some people that may have been in town for a long time and when it was a hospital, the cafeteria walks out onto just this big patio that has a great view of downtown and Pikes Peak. And that was really the reason that this developer was really drawn to this mixed use development. And then they acquired, the same developer acquired the Gazette building just to the west of it. So they have some interesting ideas on how to repurpose that. It's got a really cool printing press area that could be repurposed into something. People are much more visionary than I am, but it looked like it could be something that was kind of fun and unique for Colorado Springs. Then I will turn it over back to Kerry.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I'll move on to describing a few of our Phase 2 environmental site assessments. So this property is at 1207 South Nevada. You can see the yellow star there way down at the bottom, kind of near Fountain Creek. It's been various forms of auto fueling and repair for most of its life, and the property owners are interested in potentially seeing what its future could look like and maybe even marketing the site in the future. So when properties like this, when owners express an interest in maybe not working there, not running that business anymore, there's always the potential that it can sit vacant for a while. And to kind of make sure that doesn't happen, we wanted to get in and see if there were any environmental risks at this site, and there had been some investigation done in the past and some tanks closed in place in the past. So on the next slide, you'll see what we did is we did a Phase 1, and we looked for historical uses. So this is one of my favorite things, is to look at these old historic maps. They're called Sanborn Fire Insurance maps, and they go back often into the 1800s and show what was on these properties. And it's a little bit small to see, but you can see where it says auto service, and it says there's like 3 buildings there that say auto service. So, and this is probably a map from the 40s. So we did some research. We read through the file at the regulatory agencies to see what had already been closed out, what had already been investigated, and if there were any data gaps that we might want to make sure that we fill so that there are no kind of environmental surprises when this site potentially gets redeveloped. So on the next slide, you'll see just kind of an idea. Again, it's kind of small, but this is our part of our work plan. This is the figure we submitted to EPA to say these are where we want to collect some samples and see if there could be any contamination that got missed on the previous investigations. So that all of the field work is done. We've just got all the lab data back, and now we're just writing up the findings. The next site is the one Aaron had mentioned earlier. You can see right to the east of that yellow star, that's Transit Mix, and that's Shooks Run Creek that takes that detour around Transit Mix. Well, those developers bought the BNSF rail kind of corridor piece that's just along the west side of Transit Mix, and wanted to see if there were any potential environmental concerns that they were going to have to deal with when they redeveloped that site. Rail corridors have a host of problems, everything from the chemicals used to treat the rail ties to materials that were loaded and unloaded in the rail yard. So we have kind of in the same status as that South Nevada site. We have finished all the field work. We've just received all the lab data back from the lab, and we're in the process of reporting that out now. So this is an example, kind of the similar thing with our sampling and analysis plan that we submitted to EPA showing where we wanted to take samples along that rail corridor. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to talk about a project in Fountain.
Thanks, Kerry. So the image you see in front of you is called Woodman Hall. It's a 1905 historic property in our downtown core, across from City Hall. Urban Renewal had bought the property, I'm going to say in 2018 or 19. Our scope of work is done through asbestos and lead paint survey, if you can imagine, from 1905 to current era. There's been a lot of adaptation of that property's interior and the types of products used, so it's really critical for us to understand what we were working with at the start. And so we did have to do minor remediation. We didn't really have a lot that was discovered through that process of a phase 1 and 2. And next slide, I think it's also showing the image. Yep. So as you can see, our abatement and renovation efforts are underway for the ground floor. It is a 3-level property. The upper floor does have a current tenant. It's our first tenant for the premises. She's a yoga tenant. She's just signed her 3-year lease. And we are working through some climate controls and adaptation of that second floor to allow for some fulfillment. The ground floor, which is the images you see in front of you here, that will be going out for construction bid probably by the spring. And 2023 will be our emphasis of the ground floor renovation process, and then try to procure some small business tenant fulfillment for that urban core.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Kimberly.
I've never been called a Kerry.
Yeah. So one of the unique things about this grant is it also allows us to do some reuse planning for the parcel, which really kind of just helps people really visualize what it could be from what it is today. One of the projects that we're excited to kind of re-look at what we could do with it is Dorchester Park. As many of you are aware, that's kind of a tougher part of town there. They have a lot of fenced off facilities. Facilities have been removed in the past. They've put up concrete barriers to keep people out of the parking lot now. So there's a couple of things that have gone together here with this. One is that there is a group effort, a visionary effort for what Fountain Creek and Monument Creek could look like, called coscreeks.org. You can go to that website, coscreeks.org, and you can see the vision throughout the whole corridor. But we also, with the area, we also have a need with the Springs Rescue Mission for some transitional type housing in that area. So we were able to do multiple exhibits and layouts of this that could meet the vision of both plans. And I'll kind of show you that kind of here in the next one. So you can kind of see the white buildings on the north side could be the kind of the transitional housing needs, while we still open up the creek, have it be an amenity, have it be a recreational type purpose. So this grant's really been a huge help in just getting us to kind of meld different visions together so that the community could see what this parcel could become in the future. Another one that we're looking at too is the old Campers Village. It was a KOA campground for the longest time. It has gone through multiple ownerships over the years. It currently is in ownership of Widener Apartments, which are doing a lot of the apartment buildings around the new Switchback Stadium. So there is a potential for this to somehow be a park amenity. So we're just going to start working with Park and Rec and see what kind of amenities or needs that this could be for them if we were to acquire this as a city asset. But it is currently still in private ownership of Widener Apartments. And I'll turn it over to Kerry to talk about Concrete Coyote.
Thanks. So Concrete Coyote is a property, I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, the wedge-shaped property there where the yellow star is, and that's a property that was specifically mentioned in the grant application. It's right there on Shook's Run, and we talked about in the grant application how it could be sort of a destination element along the Legacy Loop. So it's owned by Concrete Couch. a local nonprofit who does a heck of a lot of programming for the community to come on site and learn how to do all kinds of, recycling projects, art projects. They have sports events and theater events. So they wanted to get together with some nonprofit partners and talk about how the use of that site could be more robust, how the local community could just make more use and get more access and enjoyment out of that site. So on the next slide, it's just a little shot of, we invited 4 of their nonprofit partners to come and have sort of a brainstorming session back in March about how to just enhance the use of the site. So we received sort of written recommendations from each of the project partners, and we're going to use those to kind of blend together and come up with a sort of a roadmap for Concrete Couch to apply at this site. What kind of programming is desired, what types of changes to the surface, the shape of the use of the site would be needed, what kinds of resources are needed. We did originally look to see if there were environmental constraints. We didn't do a phase 2, and we didn't even really do a formal phase 1, but we reviewed, there have been some assessments done out there, and we reviewed those, and there weren't any smoking guns. Really kind of, it's just degraded, unfortunately, and they're doing a great job of kind of taking the concrete out of the creek and trying to get that restoration done. So there's a lot of exciting potential at that property. So this was kind of one way to tackle what kind of amenities could be housed there. So I will then turn it back over to Kimberly to talk about some reuse planning in Fountain.
Thanks, Kerry. So we were fortunate that the coalition partners did support 2 different project areas for conceptual reuse and design scope. And the first one we're going to talk about is the Lorraine Center. So the Lorraine Center is actually about 9 acres. It's a former elementary school from the 1970s. The city purchased the property around 2017, 18 era, and used it for city services fulfillment, streets, park and rec, different staffing appropriations of teams. But doing further exploratory due diligence of the property, we found that there was quite a bit of aged product. It was hard to rehab it without sinking more money than the asset was worth. And so the city then determined it would go ahead and actually build a utilities headquarters and move those utilities out and allow this property to be redeveloped. So as we previously talked about Woodman Hall, this property sits off 3rd Street back from the main epicenter of downtown, and it's really not in a high corridor, but it has potential to draw more traffic into that downtown core. So we've done a conceptual design reuse. I think you can go to the next slide, Erin. Thank you. And you will see it's a mixed-use product. So in the lower right corner or triangle, that will retain as Park and Rec, as well as our recycling center for the community service and needs. That will not change, but will be improved as a facility standard. Then the rectangle you see on the left side, the bottom quadrant represents a community center. That has been something that the community has really been vocal about and needed in our community. The back half is more of a dense housing product for senior assisted or active living product. And then the spine, you see 4 buildings in the middle. Those are proposed as medical fulfillment offices. We thought it actually really mixes really well. Medical is one of those services that we are desperately trying to attract to our community to serve the residences, but has nowhere to plug and play today. And so we thought, in working with a private developer, that we will go out to an RFP process from here and try to procure that partner to try to aim for that redevelopment scope. I'm highly impressed to say that the survey we launched for community engagement actually derived over 560 responses. That's phenomenal for a site that's like 3 streets deep against a railroad track that you never see because it's at a dead-end street. And really all the mixes that we just showed in that conceptual design were highly supported by the resident feedback and the community engagement feedback. So we're kind of tying a bow on this now. We had some editing we had to do with Stantec on their design side. We'll be launching a public survey, not a survey, but a public response and report out on this project, probably in the November timeframe. So please look for that coming through our city council measures at the city of Fountain. Next slide. No, they were just showing the engagement markers that Kerry wanted to kind of show from that survey scope. So the next one is just getting ready to start. So again, the Coalition Partners really supported this, and this is called the Blas and Aga Park Pedestrian Corridor. So if you're familiar with our community, at the north end of Old Town, there is Aga Park already established since the 1950s. And then this actually, Blas Park, is at the southern corridor of that area. And Urban Renewal purchased some of the initial properties, from the railroads, as well as from private ownership back in 2017, 2016 era, and really has been putting this puzzle together to help city parks create this pedestrian promenade corridor. So where we are today, we have just formulated our working group. It's a good mix of representation. It represents the school district, it represents city planning, as well as historians. This project is really predicated by a litany of master plans for our Old Town district, as well as transportation improvements. Right now, if you're familiar with our community, Illinois and Indiana are two mainstream streets that are going to transition and create a dead end to create this promenade corridor of access in the plan of the park. And as well as, there's a lot of great folklore, if you're familiar with our community, of an 1888 train blast. It has a lot of sabotageal folklore to it, but it's actually something that is rich in Colorado history, and it's something we want to help amplify and create that attraction draw for our community. So as I said, the working group just got formulated. We will be meeting, our first session is October 25th. We will go through 3 rounds in working with the Stantec consultant team on engineering kind of a conceptual design. And then we will go out, as we did in the Lorraine process, out for public engagement, create a survey, and really generate that feedback we need to create this really warm and engaging corridor. It's a key element in any downtown. You always have to have that attraction value, and this is something we really need for our community to thrive long term.
I'll turn it back over to Kerry.
Thanks. I love that site, Kimberly. That's really exciting. I can't wait to see what those concepts look like. So another piece that the EPA grant covers and is an expected kind of component of any brownfield program or project is community outreach. So trying to make sure that the community has as much information about the project as possible and knows who to talk to if they have questions or sites that they would like to recommend for the program, and just kind of generally stay up to date. So this is just kind of a high-level overview of the outreach that the city has done throughout the course of the grant. Everything from, making presentations at council meetings to having these public meetings, setting up a webpage with fact sheets, doing press releases, or even getting the press interested in doing their own sort of article and interview. The outreach that's involved with the site reuse planning that Kimberly was describing for Fountain and like we did for Concrete Coyote. So yeah, this is just kind of to summarize how the city has kind of really stepped up and actively taken on the outreach and engagement piece. So the next slide just kind of covers next steps. Essentially it's pretty simple. We're going to complete the projects that we have underway, and then we're going to evaluate the remaining funding capacity and see what else we might be able to squeeze in the final year of the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erin and we can see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Kerry. You've been a big help on this whole project. Kimberly will attest to that.
Oh, yeah.
With all the cranking through materials and everything.
For sure.
Do we have any chat questions?
We do not have any chat questions at this time. If you do, you can put them into the Q&A then. But no.
Do we have any questions from our live audience?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
So are the EPA grants taxpayer funded? Is that taxpayer money?
Kerry, do you want me to take that one, or do you want to talk a little bit more about the total program?
I mean, yeah, it's taxpayer money, it's federal money, so that's kind of part of the reason why outreach and engagement is important, is because this is publicly funded.
All right. Who owns the Gazette's old building and the old hospital? What developer?
Those are owned by Norwood currently.
Okay. What did we pay for there? Was it just samples or what was funded?
We're still working through that with them right now, but what we're trying to do is just compile all of their data that they have from all of their previous phase ones when they bought the property, and all the historical cleanup that was done by different owners of the property, and try to just do a gaps analysis so that we can just sort of give them a roadmap on when they do start to redevelop. This is the path from an environmental standpoint that'll get you hitting the ground running.
So all we've paid for there is the samples.
We haven't done any, Kerry, you can probably speak to this a little bit more, but I do not believe we've done any samples other than just collecting data at this time.
Okay. Are you going to seek funding to do things at those two locations?
Go ahead, Kerry.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Could you kind of expand on what you mean by seek funding for continued work?
Yeah. Are you going to ask the EPA or fund anything for any kind of cleanup or decontamination or anything like that, and seek the funding from an additional grant? Or is it just going to be on the developer's pocketbook?
Yeah, and Aaron, you can jump in on that one too. I mean, I think from the preliminary look that we've had at the data that's already been gathered, the assessments that have already been done, it doesn't look like there are really that many significant data gaps for them. Quite a bit of work's already been done. So, and because this grant is close to spent down, it's doubtful that this grant will be used to do sampling there. But if the developers choose to pursue their own funding, they do have, there's funding available at the state level for cleanup if they need it, or for further assessment if they need it. Private entities can't apply for an EPA Brownfield grant. Only nonprofits and municipalities can. So they wouldn't have that avenue open to them, but they would have state level grants potentially available.
Where the nonprofit or the governmental entity would have to own the property to apply for a cleanup grant.
So if they convert themselves to a nonprofit and to rehab those areas, then they would be able to seek money.
I think that's a correct statement.
Okay.
Yep, that's true.
And to clarify, you realize the grant is just, I think you get this, but the grant can only specifically be used for certain things. It's not money that would really be allocated for other sources of what we're using. We apply for federal grant for the Brownfield. So it's like, it's taxpayer dollars, but it's not like we could take this and fix our parks or road. Like we couldn't just use the money.
I know, it's a specific pile of
I just
money.
wanted to clarify, just because sometimes that gets a little.
Lots of
confusing.
piles.
And I think it's also clear and important to say that the cities do not receive the money directly. It's actually allocated towards the consultant who manages and scopes that project under the support of the coalition, appropriating the dollars per project.
And all the coalition partners had a cooperation agreement on who was going to spend time and how much money could be billed to the grant.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone else in the chat next?
No other questions? Despite getting started 15 minutes late, we are 10 minutes early.
I kept my promise. Promises kept.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your time.
Yeah, thank you.